Well, welcome. This is If My People Bible Reading and Part Two. We ask that you start at Part One, and this Part Two is just before we begin reading the Bible scriptures, starting from the very beginning of the book to the very end. It will take in 15 minutes segments at a time, so bear with us and follow us in numerical order in linear fashion from Part One to wherever it is to takes to part 200 until we're done. So we ask that you be blessed. We read this Bible from beginning to end. We comment on it, and we ask you to rightfully divide the word and trust nothing that our commentaries have said. Test everything and all matters. Um, the Father will prove it right. So, welcome to If My People Bible Reading, and let's get you started here. All right, we're going to start. In the background, you can see when I started the Bible is in printed form, and it is 1,200 pages long. It took over a decade to build, and this is just the front and the back of the book. And then we start with this. Most Bibles have Old and New Testaments. Here we have Mikra, that which is read, because it was not called the Old Testament not until hundreds and hundreds of years after Yeshua died and rose the Father. And the New Covenant, it was called the New Covenant by Paul, by matter of fact. And so the Mikra is the Old Covenant, and the New Covenant is the one where it starts in the book of Gospels of Matthew. And just notice here, we start with Job. Don't get too excited here. It's going to drive some people up the wall. But we did this intentionally because if you take a person who's never heard of the Bible and you start them with Job, it really gets their attention going on um, what this Bible is, because it was written probably before Genesis, and so most people that have done massive studies on this, they always say, well, Joel was written first, but then they pick up the Bible and say, but I prefer the King James. Okay, no problem with that. We don't have a problem with most any Bible out there that was simply worded carefully and put together. There are thousands of them. This one is very different, and because you're going to see some things that only come from the Bible, not from extracurricular sources. Here we begin with Genesis and Exodus, and everything goes through. Here's your 5 books of the Torah, and then the second reading. There's Deuteronomy, which ends it, and then the songs, and we go through things look pretty good. When we get into Ezekiel, we'll be talking about the scrolls that were written, the 13 scrolls written, and the dates they were written. If you read Ezekiel, you got to pay attention to the dates. Very specific. It's one of the few books that exist of the Bible that give specific dates and times of the year. Then, when you finish up, you find that Nehemiah actually wrote the book after Malachi. So, once again, that's different from the other 30, 40,000 types of books out there. And when we when we get to the New Covenant, um, we start with Yaakov, because Yaakov was written, or the book and Galatians was written before Matthew and Mark. Yeah, it was. And so we put it in that order. And uh, when you read the books in this order, when they were written and dated, that was how the people read it in those days. In the first century AD, they read things according to when you get something in the mail and you read it, and 3 months later another letter arrives, another scroll arrives, you read it. But you don't sit one back and say, well, I'm going to wait till the scroll of Mark arrives. That's not how it was done. So, why churches and institutionalized training facilities that run businesses these days called church and make a business out of it and charge you a massive amount of money for building campaigns and so forth do this, we will never know. They get the same training in the same theological institutes, and they know the truth, and yet they say the exact opposite. Amazing. As we go through, we end up with, of course, the revelation of Yeshua. Then we have resources at the end. So just to kind of get you going here, let's get started. Well, it's in front of you. Big questions before you begin reading If My People Bible. What makes this Bible different from any other Bible you can obtain and read? Well, the answer is most Bibles printed in the last 100 years are numerous in design and contain intentional coordinates, added in false doctrines. These are intentional, required cross reading, intentional, obvious fake instructions such as pre, mid, wrath, post trib, post millennial. All these things you have to pick and choose. Required cross tree that you open up a Bible and it's split in two pieces on each page, and you have to go this way and that way. You have to go through 7 readings in further reading in the Old, and then 7 different readings and 8 different readings in the New Testament before you finish one single sentence. It really confuses people. This book was simply read it just like a book. You must pick one or another. We comment that you must hear and obey the word, and the best way to do is to read the Bible like a book, first page to last. I mean, this is amazing. Yahweh's ways are not our ways. So he wrote the book, and he meant it to be read, and the dates that he read it. So read it like a book. Hasatan, mankind, even Yeshua, does not know the year and the day of the return of Yeshua to gather his bride. Only the Father knows. Don't search the world looking for the day and the hours predicted by thousands of those who claim to hear from God on a personal level. Now, that's the date and time we live in. So I'm just telling you, trust in the Father and His Son. When His Son is given the big green go to come get you, He will come get you. And it's going to be much like the first Exodus. Nobody's going to be flying through outer space with supernatural Superman bodies. It doesn't say that anywhere in the text when you take a look at the entire Bible. Read it from beginning to end and then critique us as much as you want. But read the Bible as we've written it here with these comments and then comment. Secondly, there are thousands of Christian church denominations who simply can't agree on what actually happened, beginning with Genesis 1:1 and ending at 1:3. Well, these 3 verses, depending on which Bible you read, which denomination you attend, which preacher you believe, which theological college they graduated from, which doctoral dissertation they published, have now created over 30,000 different Christian faiths. Well, how can this be? Is this what Yahweh wanted when He gave you a soul and a body? Our commentary takes you back to the beginning, the garden, the first Torah instruction. And then we direct you to read this Bible from the beginning to the end, just like any other book. And when you reach the last book, the book of Revelation of Yeshua, you will be blessed, for the ending will be revealed from the very beginning of the Bible. The world begins perfect with no mention of a sun, no earth. Genesis 1:1, as we see it today. There is a sun and there is a moon, and it will end. Revelation 21, the very same last chapter of the book Revelation. So, what happened in Genesis 1:1 to 1:3? Well, when you get to the end and you read the entire Bible with all the information, and then you read chapter 21, you understand what happened in that first sentence. Very obvious, because we know in the very end there will be no moon, there will be no gravity, so to speak, there will be no sun for the light of that we need. It comes from the Father. Adam and Eve did not need a Bible to read from when they were perfect in the garden. They had a few Torah instructions. By the way, Torah started then. It didn't start with Moses. However, conditional Torah. They were to tend the garden, walk with Yeshua, and to not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. If they hear and obey, they live long and prosper forever with the Father and the Son. The condition, Torah, if not followed, was death. And as a result of sin, they lost the promise. But it was conditional, and we didn't know what or who is that condition to redeem eternal life and a perfected heart again. Yeshua represented their covering in the garden and banishment from the garden with clothing to cover their nakedness, which was the sin that lived in their hearts. We see this again in Genesis 12 through 15 through the promise made by Yahweh and Yeshua to Abraham and his enlarged family, representing the stars of the night sky. But again, there was a condition. The separated, divided animals as witnessed by Abraham, was an oath, a promise. Yeshua representing the cut animals as a blood covenant. To break this covenant, Yeshua would have to die for all those who would hear and obey Yahweh then and now in the future, right up to the second coming of Yeshua to gather his bride. While yet we were still sinners, Yeshua died for all those who confessed in him and separated themselves from the evil of this world. Yeshua gives Torah in Timothy 2:15 to rightfully divide the word. Now there's Torah in Timothy, the New Covenant, New Testament 2:15. Pay attention to that. In fact, there are 1,050 Torah commands in the New Covenant. Didn't hear that in church, did you? There are precious few Bibles in this world that points out this incredible, sadly intentional fact to you. This Bible points out dozens of examples totally left out of other Bibles, such as the importance that the promise given by Yahweh was for the meek to inherit the earth, not heaven, earth first, not to be raptured away to the eternal heaven. Think on that. That means that your salvation is not a personal salvation, a personal Jesus, separating you as you saved believer from the millions of other shepherds and sheep that have died in their faith and those still living. You are to be a living sacrifice to Yahweh, no longer waiting for a temple again in Jerusalem for slaughtering of blood and animals. You are to be a living temple, no longer to attend a church building in large crowds, paying all kinds of debt to get that building paid for, synagogues that keep the Old Testament Torah but totally ignore the New Covenant Torah. You are to keep the Shabbats and not the thousands of false additions that traditions of men, false church doctrines, have created to be denominational instead of singular congregational faith of the people of the way. You are to keep the appointed times, kadosh days, instead of accepting the well-established pagan practices of Easter, bunnies running around, bloody eggs, Christmas, St. Patrick's. This is just to name a few, as there are 300 million gods on earth identified worldwide, thousands of set-apart pagan holidays to also mention, all pushing deep into modern church doctrines and practices, and they put it right up to their pulpits. We boldly say that this Bible will not be accepted by mainstream Christianity. It will be attacked on all sides, for their agenda is nothing in comparison to what we are sure you will find when you go beyond the milk of the word and continually seek the meat, the truth of the word. Ask Yahweh, and it will be given to you. We boldly challenge your soul to read this entire Bible commentary and then judge us in the end if you can endure to the end. Only a remnant will enter the final heaven. There may be millions in the final heaven that are remnant, but billions have lived and died on this earth before the great white throne judgment day that will come. Do the institutional church leaders today really follow the word? First century believers did not need to ask for leaders to dominate from the pulpit, spend billions on worldwide church buildings, follow specific orders of worship, sermons, pastors, or their Sunday church clothing make them special ministers of music, tithing, clergy salaries, baptism as infants, children, or when the church bulletin says so, separating the meal from with believers with from the communion wafer, a cup, communions weekly, monthly, or at odd times, every third month. Christian education that has nothing to do with how the Christian or how the disciples received the word. There are thousands of more examples of what not to do. Why do the institutional church leaders demand this from their sheep? Now we're going to stop right here because our time's up for the 15 minutes. But we want you to be aware that we love you. Bear with us on this. You're going to, once you get into this, you will not be able to stop watching. You will watch every one of these segments because it's short. It's 15 minutes, and I'm trying to talk, so I'm not putting you to sleep. It's not one of these things. Oh, well, I'll put this on in bed at night, and then I'll fall asleep, and I don't know what it said in the morning. I'll try to be somewhat entertaining, and to keep you. But I think the Ruach Hakodesh will keep you interested. For that, we say Shabbat Shalom, and see you at the next presentation, part 3.